Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Hill, and I am a research psychologist and also author of This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, The Surprising Science of Women, Hormones, and the Law of Unintended Consequences. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the interesting facts I've learned from my research into the surprising factors that can impact women's fertility. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. To start with, let's just address the fact that infertility is not something that's super uncommon. In fact, it's a fairly common occurrence for women and their partners. Research finds that about 10% of women between the ages of 15 to 44 in the US have experienced infertility at some point in their lives. And here, infertility is defined as an inability to conceive after actively trying for over a year. So that's 10% of couples. And then another 12% experience impaired fertility or just difficulty conceiving. So it's not terribly uncommon for couples to sometimes struggle with the ability to become a parent. Some of the factors that impact or can impact negatively a woman's fertility are things that we mostly know about. So for example, we know that a woman's age is associated with a diminished ability to conceive, right? So we know that a woman's fertility generally peaks around age 25. It stays relatively elevated, but then it begins to decline once a woman is in her 30s and begins to decline very rapidly as a woman begins to approach menopause. Right? So as women get older, of course, their probability of being able to successfully conceive, at least easily, declines in a fairly predictable way, right? This isn't exactly a surprising factor that impacts a woman's fertility. Another, not surprising factor that can impact a woman's ability to become pregnant is the presence of ovulation disorders, right? And these are, again, just like infertility itself, unfortunately, very common. Just to give you an example, women who have PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? This is about 10% of women, right? So 1 in 10 women in the US suffers from this. And this is something that is associated with decreased probability of ovulation, and of course, then more difficulty becoming pregnant. We also know that there are certain types of thyroid disorders and disorders of the adrenal glands that are also associated with periodic failure to ovulate. So ovulatory disorders such as PCOS or such as a thyroid disorder can also impair a woman's ability to easily become pregnant, impairing fertility. You also may have heard, or maybe you have not heard, that stress is also something that can be associated with impaired fertility. And there's quite a bit of research now that's been going on for several decades showing that stress does predict decreased ability to conceive, right? It's associated with more challenge becoming pregnant. And the physiological reasons for this is that the stress hormone cortisol, which gets released when we're experiencing extreme stress, this actually inhibits the release of gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is the releasing hormone that actually stimulates the ovaries to mature an egg follicle and ovulate. Right? So when you have high levels of stress hormone, this actually inhibits and can be inhibitory to ovulation, which of course is going to make it more difficult for a woman to conceive. Other researchers have found that when women are experiencing stress, in particular during the follicular phase of the cycle, so this is the period of a woman's cycle prior to ovulation, so days 1 up until the point that a woman ovulates, which can happen anytime between days, say, 11 to 21, we know that experiencing extreme periods or extreme feelings of stress during this time can actually lead to the follicular release of progesterone, which we know that progesterone is something that actually nurtures fertility when it's released during the luteal phase of the cycle after ovulation has occurred. But when progesterone is being released prior to ovulation, this is actually something that can be disruptive of the ovulatory process, stopping it in its tracks, right? So it's through these different mechanisms that we know that stress can impair fertility, right? It's not just your doctor telling you that you need to relax and try to meditate, and, to try to nurture your fertility. Nurturing your fertility, this is a real deal. Stress and like our brain and our body are so tightly connected to one another. And this is just one of the ways that it manifests itself. So one of the ways that we can help to nurture our fertility, of course, is taking our mental health and taking our stress levels very seriously and trying to do things to try to help regulate our stress response. Research also finds that impairments in social support also seem to play an important role in terms of a woman's fertility. And again, we need to think about the fact that our fertility and our ability to become pregnant is something that our body is only going to want to do, right, during times when it feels, and again, I'm talking about this is an inanimate object, but of course, our body is not thinking and conscious and making choices. But our body is wired with deep evolutionary wisdom that we've inherited from our ancestors over millions of years. And part of that wisdom is only to allow pregnancy to occur. That is only, allow an egg to fully ripen, be released, and implant itself during periods of time when it feels pretty confident that a pregnancy is going to be able to successfully occur. And one of the factors that we know that's historically played a really important role in a woman's ability to successfully maintain a pregnancy, but also the ability to successfully, breastfeed and nurture a child, because of course, throughout most of our evolutionary history, we didn't have alternatives to that, is a woman's level of social support. And research finds that when women report experiencing or feeling low levels of social support, so they don't feel like they have a nurturing group of people to help take care of them, and sort of their own psychological and emotional needs, that this is associated with physiological changes that can impair fertility, including, again, the follicular stage release of progesterone, which again is something that is known to be related to disruptions rather than a facilitation of ovulation during this period. Another factor that many women are surprised to learn plays a role in terms of their ability to successfully ovulate and then, of course, potentially conceive is their energy balance. And that is, the degree to which they're taking in adequate calories, but not overtaking in calories, and their own energy stores on their body. And pregnancy requires two things of a woman's body, right? One is that a woman's body is able to provide a 9-month uninterrupted supply of energy, not only to itself, but also to a developing fetus. But it also requires that a woman's body be in good health, right? So anything that impacts these two factors can potentially harm fertility. And indeed, there's a lot of research linking both too low of body weight and too high of body weight with restricted fertility. And this is because when a woman's body weight is too low, this is sending an internal physiological signal to the body that this woman's body might not possibly be able to provide this 9-month uninterrupted flow of energy to a developing fetus. And when body weight is too high, such as when women are obese, this is sending disruptions in things like insulin levels and other types of hormonal imbalances that are associated with worse health, and then potentially can impair the probability of a successful pregnancy. And again, we have to remember that our bodies are designed by this process of evolution by selection, which is very tightly tied to the ability of being able to successfully maintain a pregnancy. And so when our body is in a state that's associated with a high probability of pregnancy success, which means that we are well taken care of, we are well nourished, and our body is in good physical condition and good physical health, these things will help to nourish and promote our fertility, whereas things that are associated with having a lack of social support and too much, stress, chronic stress, not having adequate calories, having too many calories, and therefore being in poorer health. These are the types of things that can potentially harm fertility. And indeed, research does find that there's longer conception time for women with very low and also very high BMI. Your immune system is another thing that potentially can modulate your ability to conceive. And there is a lot of research that indicates that immunological stressors can be disruptive of ovulation. So there's been a great deal of research that shows that chronic inflammatory conditions, as well as acute inflammatory conditions, so experiencing an acute health problem, so a current illness, or getting a vaccination, for example, something that causes an immediate immune response, experiencing these immunological stressors, whether it's that we're sick because we have a cold or the flu, we get a vaccine and that causes an inflammatory response, or whether we're somebody who experiences chronic inflammation because of a chronic inflammatory disorder, such as an autoimmune disorder, for example. All of these different factors that are associated with inflammatory signaling within the body and activation of the immune system are known to be potentially disruptive of ovulation. And again, this is just this idea that the body pays very close attention to internal physiological signals that are providing information about the wisdom of a pregnancy right now. And so if your body is experiencing an immunological stressor, this is sending an internal signal to the body that, you know what, let's just not get pregnant on this cycle and let's maybe wait till the next one, right? Because your body potentially and probably will have healed at that point and be in better condition for a pregnancy to be able to successfully occur. So the immune system also potentially can be something that can be temporarily disruptive of ovulation and therefore, of course, fertility. At a more specific level with the immune system, some women, and this is fairly uncommon, but it does happen. And so if you are somebody who's experiencing unexplained fertility, this is something that you should consider getting tested for. And that is that some women will actually start to create, their adaptive immune system will start to create anti-seminal or anti-sperm antibodies. And this will actually, this is where a woman's body is creating an antibody that actually attacks seminal fluid and attacks sperm. And this, of course, can potentially be disruptive of fertility. And this tends to occur among women who have a very robust adaptive immune response. And this is something that's worth considering being tested for if you do have prolonged unexplained infertility, when you don't have any of these other factors that we've discussed potentially going on. And lastly, and this one is based on some new research that's really provocative and super interesting, and that is that some women may experience impaired fertility because their eggs are not releasing the kinds of chemoattractants that their partner's sperm recognizes and therefore guides them toward them. So there's a new body of research that finds that women's eggs release these chemoattractants that sperm pick up on and then use to guide them toward the egg. And of course, this is going to be something that's going to be facilitative of conception, right? Because it's going to increase the probability that conception will occur if the sperm is able to find the egg. And follicular fluid, right, which is where these chemoattractants are present, this preferentially attracts the sperm from some males, but not others. And researchers have absolutely no idea why, but it seems very clear from the experimental evidence that some females' eggs release chemoattractants that are attracted by some male sperm, and it's not preferentially attracted by their partner's sperm. They didn't find that, but they did find that there seemed to be some preference where the sperm were more easily guided by some cervical fluid than others, and that some cervical fluid attracted certain sperm relative to others. And nobody knows why yet with the research. But they do think that this is something that is the result of what they call cryptic female choice, right? Where essentially the egg is trying to lure certain types of male sperm to their web. Interestingly enough, the research has also looked at pregnancy outcomes of women whose partners were or were not drawn to their cervical fluid. And what they found was, one, there were no differences in the probability of conception when IVF was initiated. So suggesting that there isn't any difference in the ability to potentially conceive, when conceiving with IVF. When a person has compatible or incompatible cervical fluid, and also that there's no differences in the health or probability of a successful pregnancy. And so nobody is really sure exactly what the reason is that this happens, but it doesn't seem to be associated with differential probabilities of conception with IVF or differential outcomes of pregnancy. And so women who are experiencing infertility, they've been trying to get pregnant for over a year, they're not getting pregnant, and potentially it could be caused by this sort of new exploratory mechanism. This doesn't mean that you and your partner are poorly compatible and that you won't be able to get pregnant and have successful pregnancies and healthy children with IVF, because the research suggests that these things aren't even related to each other, which is why everybody's got a big question mark over their head about why this happens. I look forward to the future of research being able to potentially figure this out. So keeping tabs on your fertility, I think it's really important for all of us as we're trying to understand our bodies and our hormones and our cycles and how our minds and our bodies are interconnected, because as we've learned here, they're interconnected in so many important ways, right? And the way that we feel and experience the world can impact our fertility, right? And then of course, our fertility, as we know, can impact the way that we think and feel and experience the world, right? So if you track your fertility using something like Priya, this, especially when we combine it with journaling, allows you to really get a handle on the relationship between your cycles and your fertility, and then environmental conditions, right? So if you're tracking your cycle using Priya and tracking your fertility using Priya, and you're also keeping tabs on things like your levels of stress, whether or not you're experiencing an illness, the degree to which you're feeling socially supported, and so on and so forth, this can help you get a real tight handle on your mind-body connections. And you might be able to make some of these, ahas with yourself, looking at, my cycles during the times that I'm experiencing a lot of stress, they do seem to be a little bit more irregular than they are during cycles where my stress levels are under control. And so getting a handle on these things can be really powerful in terms of women being able to take charge of their hormones and take charge of their own fertility. If you are regularly ovulating and is still continuing to experience difficulty conceiving, definitely take a visit to your healthcare provider because they might be able to help you better determine what the cause is of your fertility struggles, and then potentially be able to come up with a solution. Thank you.